I don't believe directly play in this space currently, but there have been, I'd point to two interesting technologies, one of which are sort of kites and sail technology. There are some challenges there that I'm probably not in a position to speak to, but there are some technologies there. There's also been, for the first time, we've seen commercial deployment of an idea called a Flettner rotor. They're kind of these tall columns that spin and kind of generate lift and actually help pull the ship along. So it's an interesting technology and worth a look at if you're not familiar with it.
Mr. Chairman, just to add to that, my expectation is at the end of the day, we will see more contribution from wind power on land to create green processes for future fuels. In other words, if you are producing hydrogen, you need to do it in such a way that you're using carbon-free electricity, right? So my guess is at the end of the day, while some of these technologies shipboard technologies can contribute to efficiency on the water, the biggest impact from wind is going to be in producing fuels on land that are then carried by vessels.
And building off of that, if you could just discuss, I'm interested that in your remark, Mr. Butler, but anyone feel free to answer that that there's a technological layer or an incentive layer that's going to be required to move to zero emissions past the 2050 50% reduction benchmark you mentioned. Could you elaborate on that? And what kind of incentives and assistance is the industry going to need to make that goal of zero emissions attainable in time to do us some good?
So, I mean, the basic premise is no matter how efficient you make a diesel engine, you're still burning diesel and you're still creating carbon dioxide as a combustion byproduct. So if we are going to get to zero emissions, we simply have to have a different propulsion mechanism using a different fuel, different technologies, and having a different emissions profile. So the single most important thing that we can do right now is to create, and develop for commercial application those new technologies. We don't know what they are right now. There are candidates. We've talked about hydrogen. People have talked about ammonia and using hydrogen either as direct burn or in fuel cells. But there are tremendous engineering questions with respect to the production of those fuels, the handling of those fuels, and the safe use of those fuels on board. So, you know, there are lots of discussions going on in various places about how you push people to adopt new technologies, you know, carbon pricing and this sort of thing, more regulations. The fact of the matter is, unless that pathway exists, you can flog people all day long, but if they have no place to go, the change won't happen. And that's why we're so focused on the research and development piece.
And let's talk about the shoreside infrastructure. What can we do in that regard to make the decarbonization of that, the import process come about more quickly?
Well, you have to do things in the proper order. Before you start talking about investing in shoreside infrastructure, you need to know what fuels and propulsion systems you're trying to support on the ships, right? So it's all of a piece, but I think you would risk stranding a lot of investment or making the wrong investments if you jump too quickly into picking a particular shoreside infrastructure before you know what the end goal is. So I think a lot of what can be productively done by government is to assist in figuring out what the right order is and supporting at each phase of that process, you know, the thing that has to happen next before you can get to the next phase.
Ms. Metcalf, and my time has expired. I'll yield to Mr. Gibbs, but if you want to say a word on that, Ms. Metcalf.
I just wanted to add one thing, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. There is no doubt that ports and shipping are going to have to work together, and we need to start now, and we actually have started talking. John put it well, saying that the order of things is the most important. But the one thing, and I will cite the American Bureau of Shipping Classification Society, and DNVGL Classification Society has done a number of studies. The DNVGL particularly, I'd recommend, it's called the Energy Outlook 2050, and there's a great chapter in there on transitional fuels. So the key, my point in intervening here is we don't go from traditional marine fuels now to zero fuels. There are transitional fuels, fuels such as LNG is a good example, that we need to be able to build the infrastructure ashore so that the new LNG fueled ships are able to use that fuel instead of having to go back to conventional. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I think, Ms. Metcalf, you make a good point about transitional fuels. I want